Hello, my name's Sarah and thank you for watching today. My channel is called Your Tree Shelf and today I'm here to do my June wrap up. So this month I have read 5 books which comprises a total of 2 non-fiction and 3 fiction, and so I'm going to tell you a bit about what I thought about the books. So the first book that I read this month was The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Studman. This is a book which I gave 4 stars to. It's about a family. So it's about a man called Tom and a lady called Izzy and their daughter Lucy. So what happens in the book? I won't give away any spoilers, but I do have to say one plot point, otherwise I can't really discuss the book. It's set just after World War One, and Tom is in Australia. Tom has just come back from the war, and he is finding life pretty difficult. And so he decides to get a job on a lighthouse. So they had lighthouse keepers in those days, and he goes to live on an island called Janus, and he's the only person who lives on the island. And he only gets to come off the island every few years, and he gets people come and bring him supplies. The same couple of guys come and bring him supplies every few months. And he meets a lady called Izzy when he's off the island, and they start a correspondence together, and they end up getting married. And that's not really a spoiler because you know right from the prologue at the beginning of the book that Izzy is on the island with Tom. And you also know that Izzy has had miscarriages because the first opening part of the book is where Izzy is sitting at the grave of one of the babies that they've lost. So it's pretty emotional from that point of view. And then again, quite near the beginning of the book, one day there's a boat unexpectedly which comes to the island, and when they go down to look at the boat, there's a man who's dead in the boat, and there's a baby who's very much alive in the boat, a very young baby. And Izzy has just had a miscarriage quite late on her pregnancy, and she feels that this baby has been sent for them to raise. And Tom really thinks, well, we can't possibly keep this baby, like we have to alert the authorities, there's a dead man in the boat. And she says, well, obviously, you know, she doesn't have any parents, the dad's dead, what sort of mother would put her child in a boat at this age and let her go off? So she's an orphan, we're going to keep her, people won't know that it's not the baby that we just lost. So against his wishes, really, they keep the baby and call her Lucy. Again, this is all very early in the book, so I'm really not giving away the whole plot. And then the whole rest of the story is basically them being, so Tom being ripped apart by guilt about the fact that Lucy might have a mother who's desperately searching for her, and Izzy thinking, well, she's my baby, there's no way that you're going to tell anyone about her because you'll rip our family apart. So it's about the relationships between parents and children, and it's about loss of children, and it's pretty heartbreaking. The good points of this book, where I really loved Izzy, I really loved Lucy, I loved the characters which were on the mainland of the island. Tom I found quite hard to get to know. There were definitely tender moments with Tom where you feel like you've got to know him a bit, but because of the traumas that he's had in the war, he's quite difficult to crack, quite difficult to open up, and you don't really get to know him that much, even though he's in the book for the whole entirety. So that was a bit of a downside for me. The other downside, I didn't think that it portrayed a very realistic vision of parenthood at some times. Like, you know, Lucy, the little girl, she was never naughty, she never had tantrums, she was never, I don't know, she just was very good, and it all seemed to be very idyllic, very perfect. Like, there were no cross words spoken, there was no acting out. It just seemed, I felt like that bit was a little bit too, a bit too Mary Poppins in places, really. So that was the downside for me, that I didn't think it was quite realistic enough. Other bits were gut-wrenching, to be honest. Like, I cried my eyes out at points in this book. I literally had tears running down my face. And I didn't mind that, but it's made me think of them so many times since I read it. And I still feel really sad about some stuff. So I think this will affect you a lot more if you have children of your own, because you'll start putting yourself in the position of some of the characters in the book. and it will break your heart in places. But overall, I would give it 4 stars. So the second book that I read is The Nature Fix, and that's a book that I have brought up in a previous episode, saying that I borrowed it from the library and that I wanted to read it. And this is one of the books that, so I haven't said who it's by. It's by Florence Williams. It's one of the books that I wanted to focus on this channel because it talks about the benefits of nature and health, which is really important to me. As I've mentioned before when I talked about this book, I found after I'd had my daughter, when I found things difficult sometimes, one thing that always helped me was going out for a walk. So if she was grumpy or I couldn't get her to sleep, I used to put her in the pram. We'd go to walking through country lanes and fields, and I'd always feel so much better afterwards. So that's why I was really interested to read this book. And it's Florence's journey throughout different parts of the world, finding out about the research and studies that's going on to do with nature and health. So it's all very scientifically based. Florence is a journalist, and she is used to living in, forgive me, I can't remember which part of the state she lives in, but she lives somewhere where it's quite mountainous, quite rural. She goes for lots of walks. And then due to her husband's job, she has to move to Washington, D.C., and she finds this way too urban for her liking. She said there's a plane which flies over her house every 60 seconds. And she just really struggles to adapt, and this is what pushes her to look into nature and the benefits. So it starts by looking in Japan and then in Korea about, they have forest bathing, which is where you go and spend time in the forest, away from all the distractions of your busy urban life, and you spend time with trees and camping and or having long walks. And researchers there are monitoring the health benefits, so they'll often check people's blood pressure and pulse rate at the beginning. They'll sometimes put special machines on their heads. They can look at their brainwave activity. They're measuring stress hormone cortisol. And they've also found, so a type of our immune cells called natural killer cells, they have found that they actually are elevated after spending time in nature, and they remain elevated for 2 weeks afterwards. So it's quite scientifically based, but in a really readable way. So it talks about that. It talks about how looking at very urban environments in the States, it looks at housing projects, it looks at those which have green views out the windows and those which don't, and they were able to demonstrate that in the projects which have more greenery and better views of nature, there is less violence. They also did the same in prisons, so they've had certain parts of prisons where they've covered the walls with scenes from nature, and the prisoners were less aggressive in this environment. They look at ADHD, and they look at forest schools for children with ADHD, and show how they have had massive improvements in their ADHD symptoms and their abilities and their achievements through going to be in the outside. I've marked a few things I want to just say as part of the book. So she's talking about how in DC she has these planes going every 60 seconds overhead. But she's also said how this can affect nature. In remote backcountry of Yosemite National Park, aircraft are audible 70% of the time, raising ambient noise levels by 5 decibels. That's enough to reduce the distance at which prey species can hear a predator approaching by 45%. Lab experiments show that when female grey tree frogs hear traffic noise, it takes them longer to find males who are calling to mate if they can find them at all. No backseat romance for them. So it just talks about how even the sound doesn't just affect us, it affects animals hunting, animals trying to find mates for each other. Recent studies in Ohio, Singapore and Australia found the difference between those who are short-sighted and those who are not short-sighted is the number of hours they spend outside. Sunlight stimulates the release of dopamine from the retina, which in turn appears to prevent the eyeball from growing too oblong. Indoor and outdoor light are totally different beasts. Even on overcast days, outdoor light is 10 times brighter and covers vastly more of the light spectrum. Educators are scrambling to come up with solutions, including installing full-spectrum indoor lights and glass ceilings over classrooms. There's a better solution. Go outside. So she was saying how we think that if children don't get enough time outside, their eyes don't develop properly, they can become short-sighted. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, because a lot is covered in this book, is depression. So they've looked at people who are severely depressed and about sort of garden projects and things that they can spend time in. And they were saying how initially some of the people were so depressed that all they could do was go outside and sit there, not try and do anything. So it says they've almost lost sensory contact from the chin down. As part of healing, the body and the brain connect again. Their interaction with plants trains them to be here and now. They slowly start to pay attention. It helps them calm down. A middle-aged mother who had severe depression said, "I found a hammock near the hedges. It was nice to discover anything outside of the life I'd led before. My brain learned to take in the birds and wind, only that. That's the first thing I remember." And she goes through, when she goes through the scientific data, she makes a really good point that some of the results about the benefits of nature are way more than we can achieve, or at least equals what we can achieve with drugs. And if there were drugs, if there was a nature drug, it would be for sale and people would be buying it and asking for it, and it would be getting really good reviews. And yet nature is free and there's no side effects, and we can all go outside and experience it ourselves, and it benefits us in so many ways, and we are getting less time outside than maximum security prisoners. So she recommends, from the conclusions from the studies, we should be getting at least 5 hours a month as outdoor time, which I think is highly achievable. So this is a really good book. I gave it 4 stars just because there were quite a lot of names mentioned about people who were doing different studies, and I got a bit confused sometimes who was doing what. I had to flick back and forwards, but other than that, brilliant book. I'd really recommend if this is of interest to you. So the next book that I read is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This is quite a new book, and it's about 2 couples essentially. So there's the narrator of the story, a girl called Frances, and her best friend / ex-girlfriend Bobby, who is really outspoken and opinionated and beautiful. And they're one couple. And the other couple are a lady called Melissa, who's older. So Bobby and Frances are in the early 20s, and Melissa and her husband are in their mid to late 30s. And Melissa's a photographer who's doing a piece about Bobby and Frances because they are spoken word poets. And they meet, Melissa and her husband Nick, and it's about their sort of 4-way relationship. It reminded me a little bit of the film Closer from a good 10 years ago, one of my favourite films. When it started off, I absolutely loved it. So it was building quite nicely. There was some tension there. You wondered what was going to happen between the couples. And so Frances and Nick start having an affair fairly early on in the book. And there's quite a lot of tension around the affair, and it's quite interesting. And it's interesting about Frances's relation with Bobby and Bobby's relationship with Melissa. And then from the middle of the book, it just lost it for me. So Frances becomes more and more unlikable. Frances is quite witty, but she never really says what she thinks. So she numbs everything out. She doesn't really communicate properly. She can be really cutting and sharp with people. She'll pretend nothing's wrong. She doesn't eat very much, which she comments on quite a lot. She will treat people badly, and then she'll obsess over things. And in some ways, she reminded me a little bit of Selin from The Idiot. But she just wasn't very likeable, and so I sort of lost interest in her. Bobby I like. Bobby was funny. Bobby has, she's really intelligent. There's this big irony throughout the book that Bobby is very much into, she's kind of anti-capitalist, and her principles about wealth distribution are quite strong, that she believes that everyone should have the same. And then but then she's from a really rich family and she's never had a job, and so there's kind of this irony there, which is quite funny throughout the book. Nick we get to know quite well. Melissa we get to know in bits and bobs, but it's just such a shame for me that the second half of the book let it down. I gave it 3 stars overall, but I would like to read the next book that Sally Rooney's just released, because I did like her writing. I did like the first half of the story, and I would like to give her another try. So I'd still recommend this book. I've heard other people say it's a bit of a Marmite book, a love it or hate it book, but I did fall in the middle ground. I'd go to the love it rather than the hate it side, but I can't give it more than 3 stars. The next book I read, I have given back to the library. So it was Love, Simon by Becky Abertoli. It's actually called Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda is the original title, but the edition I had was the film tie-in, and so it was called Love, Simon, because that film's just been released at the cinema earlier this year. So this is a YA novel. It's about a boy who's in his teens called Simon, who is gay, and he is trying to come out to his friends and his family. It's focused around Simon and his best friends Nick and Leah, and a new girl in their friendship group called Abby, and how the four of them fit together, and how Simon deals with his emotions about being gay. He seems fairly secure in the fact that he's gay, but he just hasn't quite got the courage to talk about it with his colleagues as yet. And then he starts emailing with another guy called Blue, and Blue goes to the same school as him, but they both keep their identity secret from each other, and they become really close, and they start falling in love over email. And Simon's desperate to know who Blue is, and Blue doesn't feel ready to reveal who he is yet. So it's about their story as well as his story with his contemporaries at school. So the things that I loved about this book, it felt very real to me. It felt like the relationships between the characters were real. It felt like the school life was real. It felt like how the teenagers were processing stuff and relating to each other felt very authentic. I didn't feel like it was in any way kind of cheesy or inauthentic in the way that the characters were, and it took me back in time to first relationships and first kisses and all that kind of stuff, and it was really nice nostalgia for me to read it. And I thought they handled the issues in the book really well. I say they, I mean the author, not they. I also felt like the characters in it, they were all like quite good kids. So they were, I don't know how to, so they were like working hard, they were taking part in extracurricular activities, they were responsible with their driving, they had the occasional thing with alcohol, but then they sort of like would discuss that afterwards, and it didn't feel like they were like goody two-shoes or anything. It just felt like they were good role models for other YA readers. I really loved this book. I read it in, I think, 2 days. I really, really loved the film as well. I thought that the film was an excellent adaptation of the book, and I gave this one 5 stars. There's a follow-on called Leah on the Offbeat, which is about Nick's best friend Leah in the book, and I would really like to read that because I thought that this book was fantastic. And then the last book that I read this month, because we're getting quite long on this video now, is this one, which is called Blame My Brain, The Amazing Teenage Brain Revealed by Nicola Morgan. This I picked up from the library as part of Shelf Help, which is a scheme that the reading agency do to try and help people who have mental health difficulties or physical health problems to pick up books which will help them with their problems. So I thought, because I've been recommending people, as in my patients, to look at the Reading Well list if they're into reading, then I thought, well, I'm going to try some of the books. So last month I reviewed one about eating disorders. This month I looked at this one. I wasn't enamoured with this book, I'm afraid to say. It's got really good reviews online, so I don't know if my perspective is slightly different because of my job. I have only given this book 2 stars. It's written for teenagers, but I can't see teenagers wading through it. It's got quite a lot of technical information. It is in bite-sized pieces, but I don't know whether I can see teenagers getting through all of the factual information in this book. It covers a wide range of subjects, so it covers anxiety and depression, drug and alcohol problems, it covers moodiness, it covers recognition of emotion and expressions, it covers sleep, it covers neurological changes in the developing brain. All of it each chapter starts with a case study, so it will be a teenager in a given scenario having an argument with their parents or that kind of thing, or feeling depressed, and then it will work through why this might be happening from a brain point of view and the reasons it could be happening from evolution or from how we grow up or our parenting and that kind of thing. I just found it was too reductionist for me, so it took everything down to a biological level, and I feel like it's way more complicated than our brain biology. She does use studies, she does use evidence. There's a lot of animal studies in here, which I really didn't like reading about because I'm vegan. So I found that quite difficult. There's a lot in here. Some sections are done really well. Like I think the drug and alcohol one is done really well. Other sections, especially sort of like depression and mood and things, I just found they were too much about this is what's happening in your brain, so this is how you might be feeling. Whereas I don't think it's that simple. There was some interesting stuff in here, like talked about how the brain changes in adolescence, about how the number of brain cells increases and then is pruned back. So I did, and it talks about how the more you use certain connections between neurons in your brain, the more they get hardwired and reinforced, and that's why practicing helps with things. So it was quite interesting in places, but I just didn't feel that A, it would appeal to teenagers particularly, or B, that I would have found it helpful as a teenager. And that's not what people are saying on Goodreads, so it might just be my perspective. But I don't see myself really recommending this book, unfortunately, to any of my patients. So that's what I thought about this book, and I'm ending with the 2-star review. If you've read any of the books that I've discussed, I'd love to hear what you thought about them, or if you've got any recommendations based on the ones that I enjoyed, that would also be really nice. I'm going to sign off now just because this has turned into quite a long wrap up. It might have been better to do in 2 parts. Let me know what you think. And I'll be back soon with another discussion. Okay, nice to speak to you all today. Bye.